all over the place, you have people who are just different citizens. And by citizens, I mean residents. I don't mean citizens legally. I mean people who are living in your community. People are more skilled, more skeptical, more diverse, have more capacity, different attitudes toward authority than ever before. They have less time to spare, less time to kind of spend in public life, but they bring more capacity to the table when they get there. They feel more entitled to the protection and services of government, and yet they have less confidence that government's going to be able to deliver. They, in many ways, are less aware, less connected to what's happening in their neighborhood or their community, and yet when they do find an issue or a decision that they care about, they're better able to find the information, the allies, the resources that they need to make an impact on that issue. So for me, this kind of all gets tied up as basically saying that citizens are better at governing and less willing to be governed than ever before. In addition to kind of creating all kinds of conflict and angst, this stuff is these kind of bigger trends that we're all dealing with are also kind of inspiring a lot of experimentation with citizen involvement and public participation. The core successful strategies or principles in this kind of work, whether we're talking about temporary ones or permanent ones, there tend to be some things that work. And these, unfortunately, tend to be things that work because people had to find it out by themselves. Building that level of participation, what works is using the networks and groupings that already exist in your community. You're not just calling a meeting, having it be in the newspaper and hoping people show up. You are figuring out, mapping, what do people belong to? How can I reach into those different kinds of organizations and groups? How can I reach leaders or other influential people in those places so that people are recruited by somebody they already know? Second is that kind of the size of the group matters. You want to use small groups for what they're good for, and large groups for what they're good for. And so, if you want people to learn, if you want people to learn from each other, if you want people to be able to consider a range of different views or options on some kind of public issue, if you want them to do action planning, those are all small group things. It's very hard to have them do any of those things in a large group kind of setting. Large groups are good for inspiring people, good for giving people sometimes a kind of a baseline of information that they can start from, some of those kinds of things. But in general, it's difficult to do the other kind of small group kind of goals in a large group meeting. And unfortunately, partly what we're up against is the tradition of citizen participation and some of the laws in this country and funnel you into trying to use large groups, which you could only ever do in small groups, and trying to use open microphones, which are good for almost nothing, to do some of the kind of dialogue and learning and input gathering that you really need small groups to do. Another piece, which is an important process piece, which is difficult, is the notion that you really, in doing this well, have to give people some different possibilities, different options, different arguments for what ought to be done. And you may be totally convinced that there is one way that the community ought to go, and yet you got to be able to kind of put that one on the piece of paper, and then option B and option C, and what are the pros and cons of each thing, and give people a chance to kind of decide for themselves what they think is the best, or what combination of things, or option D perhaps is the way they want to go. Online opportunities are also important to be providing, and that it's important to understand that by providing people online chances to be involved, you're not replacing the face-to-face, because the face-to-face and online communication have their own kind of separate unique strengths and weaknesses. The magic is in trying to figure out how you use them both.